Welcome to Chillin' in the Foyer. This is part 2 of an 8-part series around the Word of Wisdom. And today we're going to talk a little bit about science catching up to Joseph Smith. So in 1833, Joseph Smith received a revelation from God, the Word of Wisdom. And at the time, most people thought he had it wrong. Tobacco, doctors recommended it. Alcohol, prescribed as medicine. Coffee, considered harmless. Meat, eaten freely every day. But here is what science has discovered later. So let's go through a timeline here. In 1833, the Lord said tobacco is not good for man. In 1950, so over 100 years later, British study links smoking to cancer. In 1964, the U.S. Surgeon General confirmed smoking causes cancer and heart disease. So that we can see right then is he was ahead of the curve by over 120 years on what the U.S. Surgeon General, and nearly 120 years on anyone with that. And there is a link that I can show you, but basically there was a report from the U.S. Surgeon General in 1964 that highlighted the fact that cigarette smoking was responsible for a 70% increase in the mortality rate of smokers over non-smokers. The report estimated that the average smoker had a 9 to 10-fold risk of developing lung cancer compared to non-smokers. Heavy smokers had at least a 20-fold risk. So it also goes on to say the risk rose with the duration of smoking and diminished with the cessation or stopping of smoking. There's other things that it mentioned here. We won't get into everything here, but I want to point out that that is one thing that we should keep in mind. Then moving on to alcohol. 1833, the Lord said, strong drink is not good. The 1920s and 30s, it was linked to liver damage and mental illness. In 1988, alcohol was declared a Group 1 carcinogen, or possible cause of cancer, by the World Health Organization. So once again, that's something that is, I think, important for us to keep in mind as well, is that it wasn't just tobacco that was a lucky guess. It also was, when we look at it, alcohol. That was another thing that was thought to be just fine, and turns out it was not just fine. Okay, moving on. Okay, so this is where it starts to get a little interesting. When we talk about coffee or caffeine, which we presume that caffeine is why coffee was called out. But caffeine is never specifically noted. In 1833, said hot drinks, but later clarified as coffee and tea. Between the 1970s and 1990s, so over 150 years later, somewhere around 150 years later, the use of coffee and caffeine was shown to affect sleep, increase anxiety, and dependence or addiction. You depended on this caffeine or this coffee to kind of get through your day. In the last 25 years, coffee and caffeine have been linked to heart issues, especially in youth, particularly when consuming energy drinks because they have such high content, which you can see here on the side, just the content of each of those. And then finally, there is meat. And like I said, we will go into each of these more in depth. In 1833, told to eat it sparingly. Between the 1960s and 1980s, high red meat consumption, linked to heart disease. In 2015, the World Health Organization, again, lists processed meat as a carcinogenic, which once again means that it can cause cancer. So I think that's important for us to keep in mind, is that you don't have to believe that Joseph Smith was a prophet. But to me, when I look at this is the actions of a prophet when he reveals this through the Lord. I mean, you can say that he guessed all this, and that would be quite the guess, one heck of a guess for sure. But I personally do not believe that Joseph just happened to guess this right. He received the revelation from a God who knows all things, past, present, and future. And at the end of the day, that's what a prophet is. So Hope you enjoyed this video. Please feel free to like, share, and subscribe. And remember to love God and love others. And we will continue with the next episode coming up shortly.